What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. So for today's horror movie review, we are taking a look at the film Grafted. Now, this film just recently got uploaded to Shudder within the past 1 to 2 weeks, somewhere in that timeline. I'm not exactly sure, the exact date it was uploaded, but it has been within the past 1 to 2 weeks. And we did take a look at this film back on December 22nd. It was part of our daily episode 54, where we got our first look images at it, but also on that same day we got a trailer for it, which was, I think, only one trailer was released for this film, and we did do a trailer review and reaction on that same day. But we have just recently watched the film again via Shudder, so this is going to be a spoiler review. So if you have not seen this film and you want to see it and you don't want to be spoiled, I would suggest pause the video, stop the video, go watch it, and then come back. Let us know what you thought. Let us know what you think about our perspective of it, if you agree, if you disagree, and drop some comments in the comment section. But again, we are talking spoilers for this film. So again, if you do not want to be spoiled, I would recommend pausing or stopping this video at from this point forward. So again, we just recently watched this film, and as you would expect just by the name of the film and by this image, it is within the body horror subgenre of horror. We're starting to see a lot more of these body horror films between Grafted, this one, The Substance. We recently found out there's a film called Together that Neon recently purchased that was shown at this year's Sundance Film Festival. And we have another one that's going to be coming out probably next year, The Wretched, which is getting a sequel, which has been reported that it will be very body horror heavy, and that goes into production in September, which again I would expect then we would see it sometime next year, probably mid summer, early fall next year. We will probably get that sequel after 5 years since the original film that came out in 2020. But Grafted was as well as films that we were keeping an eye on. I enjoyed the trailer. I was looking forward to seeing this one. So let's get into some of the details here. So this film, I'll try to keep it very tight as far as a summary of how this film played out and what I thought of the film. So the film really focuses on the main character, Wei, played by Joanna Sun, and she's the one here in the middle on this visual here. These other two faces are two other characters, in which we will cover how that plays out. So in the beginning of the film, you see Wei as a young child with her father, who is a scientist of some sort, who you can tell he's trying to, as the title of the film, Grafted, he's trying to figure out how to graft skin. So he has on his face, along with Wei, a abnormality, whether it's a birthmark, a scar. Both have it on their faces, and she asks him early on, are you going to fix your face? And he mentions, I'm going to do it for both of us. So as he's trying to figure out the right chemical antidote, chemical combination, he ends up injecting this serum onto this piece of skin. He puts it on his face, and as you think it's starting to work, it actually takes over his face, starts covering his mouth, starts covering his nose, pretty much going to suffocate him. And he realizes this very quickly, and this is where the film starts to get graphic right off the bat. He picks up a scalpel and he starts to open up the area where his mouth is, but it keeps grafting. Every time he tries to open it up, it continues to graft. So Wei sees this and she starts to panic. Again, she's very young. She's probably, I would guess, 7 to 9 years old by when this is taking place. So she's panicking and she picks up the scalpel, and she, you would think it's a slasher film at that point, because she starts going to town trying to save her father, and he ends up dying. The graft ends up just consuming his face, and he dies. We now have a time jump where she is much older. She is now college, age. She got accepted into a college in New Zealand, and New Zealand is the primary country where this film takes place. It's where her aunt and cousin live, who she goes to live with, and keeping in mind, Wei is very traditional as far as from China, as far as the culture goes. And her cousin is not. Her cousin wasn't born there. It seems like she was born in New Zealand, raised up outside of this culture, this traditional culture. So she has a very different perspective on life than Wei does. Wei goes to live with her aunt and her cousin. Her aunt is a very absentee aunt. She's not there, she's not home a lot, and this obviously has an effect on how the cousin acts. So her cousin's name is Angela, played by Jess Hong, and there's two other girls in the primarily in the film. There's the character Eve, played by Eden Hart, and then there's Jasmine, played by Sepe Toa. And you would, as the film starts out, this core group of three, it plays off like Mean Girls, where they're very mean towards Wei. They're very judgmental of Wei because, again, she's very traditional. She speaks Chinese, and she doesn't have this very popular girl look to her. So again, passing judgment on her to the point where they're bullying her, and you can see her face scar. She tries to keep covered with a scarf. She's very secluded, right, within herself because of this abnormality that she has on her face. So she wants to be part of the crowd but doesn't know how to be part of the crowd. So she starts going to college, and she runs across this character named John. John is this homeless man that appears to be outside of the college. She makes friends with, but we only see John a couple of times. And the reason I bring John up, even though he doesn't have a major role in the film, is because he is used at the end of the film in the way as to the title of the film, which I'll get to. So as this film plays on, Wei wants to be more like her cousin, more popular, but at the same time, she wants to finish the work of her father. She wants to figure out what the right serum is, what the right chemical combination is. So as she's going through, she remembers from her childhood, in that first scene, she was drawing this flower. It's called the corpse flower. And they happen to be having one in New Zealand when this film is playing out. It's in season, so to speak, and this flower isn't the way they portray this corpse flower in the film. It's not this tiny little flower you would keep like on your desk or on your windowsill. This is like a human-sized flower that she ends up realizing is the missing piece to all of this, because when she's at college, she gets lab time under this professor, whose name is Paul, is just this outright scandalous, just sketchy professor. He is sleeping with Eve, one of his students. He's also trying to obtain another breakthrough with his own career because he's losing funding for his research. So he has to try and find some way to get a breakthrough because he had one when he was very young. So while he gives lab time to Wei, he then sees what she's working on, realizes, hey, this could be a breakthrough that I can take credit for. So starts working with her. At first, she thinks he's just being helpful. He knows he's just trying to use her for the research that her father did. So she realizes, again, it's this flower that's missing. She sneaks into this garden, gets bits and pieces of this flower while it's bloomed, and then fixes the antidote, tries the graft, realizes it works. So as this starts to play on, this is where she then utilizes it to want to become popular. This is where now the horror twist comes into play for this film. So eventually what ends up happening is her and her cousin get into a fight while they're at home. The mother is not there. So while they get into this fight after her cousin, Angela destroys like this mural, again, very traditional Chinese mural for her father. They get into a fight. Wei grabs a chopstick and just stabs Angela right through the eye, killing her. And now she's panicking. What do I do? So she drags her body upstairs to Angela's room, not to her room, but to Angela's room. Cuts off her face, injects it with the serum, places it on hers, and it starts to graft to her. So she has the face. Now this is where, as the film plays out, I have the same issue because this happened. She does this again with the character Eve, but the problem I have is that the grafting of her face takes place so she looks just like her cousin because she has her cousin's face, but the rest of her is still her. Like, you'll notice like her teeth are a certain way. You'll notice her accent is a certain way, her height, her body, everything is still her except for her face. So how nobody else realizes that this is not Angela when she grafts her face onto hers is, I think, one of the missteps in the story, that you would think somebody would notice that, because she does eventually come in contact with the boyfriend, starts making out with the boyfriend, and then during that session that they're making out on like this ledge of a cliff, which would be an odd place to make out, her face, the face starts to like peel or die, so to speak, because it starts to come off of her. The boyfriend freaks out, falls off the cliff, and now that's another victim, right? So she starts to panic again over this, realizing her face now of her cousin is starting to deteriorate, so to speak. So this is where then Eve comes into play in this story. So Eve sleeping with the Professor Paul is very sketchy in her own way. So she then goes to, have this confrontation with Wei, and Wei looks at her as another victim, another way to get what she wants. And Wei starts almost as if go crazy, right? Because she now wants what Eve has. So while she still has Angela's face on hers, she gets Eve to get her to take her back to her house, where now it's just the two of them. She gets her to come upstairs, where she attempts to attack her. She escapes outside into like this little pond. It's not even really a pond. It's like this small square, like almost like this little bit bigger size than a coffin, filled with water. And Eve thinks she's going to jump in there and hide, goes underwater. And this is again where I have a problem with this film, is she starts to cover her mouth as if she's trying to keep herself from screaming or keep the air bubbles from coming up to the surface so Wei doesn't find her. But Wei ends up finding her, and I think this is where one of the best kills in this film comes into play. So Wei comes out with this drill, and there's a drill bit probably about 2 feet long, sees the air bubbles coming up from the water, and just takes the drill and just pushes it right down into the water. Eve comes up, and you just see the drill going right through her skull. Her hair is getting all caught up in the drill. I think that's one of the best kills we've seen. Wei gets her body back somehow up into the house, takes her face off, grafts now her face to her. And again, this is where I have a problem now, because she ends up going to school and portraying Eve now, but everything else is still her. It's still her body, still her accent, everything. And some people, can call out the fact, hey, what's going on with your voice? But beyond that, everything else is still Wei. Why nobody would have caught on to the fact that, wait a minute, Eve's teeth aren't like that, or Eve isn't that tall or that short, right? So again, we continue on, and Paul now comes into the pivotal point of this story, because Paul has stolen Wei's notebook with all the research information that her father had. She starts to go crazy, can't find the book, realizes that Paul has it. Now, while she has Eve's face on her, she goes to Paul's house, because now Paul has shared this discovery. Everyone thinks he's this big breakthrough. Now he wants to celebrate, but he thinks it's Eve showing up when it's really Wei. So he has a bottle of serum still in the house. He's hidden it in this little compartment in his entertainment center, where he keeps his other drugs and other paraphernalia. Wei sees this, takes it, and then says, I gotta go. But again, portraying Eve, he realizes that she's taken it. For some reason now, he finds that she is at back at home, or Eve is at Angela's house. I know this is getting a little confusing, but just keep with me here. Once we get back to the house now, we've now realized Wei is now having to keep track of all the conversations of these other two people. She has their cell phones. She's had to tag them. And so as she's responding to people who are now looking for these two girls because they're missing, and the boyfriend has been, kind of fallen off the cliff here, is in the hospital in critical condition, can't find these other two girls. She's now trying to respond as if she's all three people. This is where the third friend shows up, Jasmine, who at some point decided to befriend Wei, went from being mean girl to trying to be her best friend, and realizes something is going on, something's amiss. So she shows up at the house towards the end of the film, and Wade's like, I'm all alone, everyone's left me. And for whatever reason, I'm not sure why she didn't decide to take her face. Maybe it was just out of respect. But when Jasmine opens up the fridge door to put some food in there for Wade, she finds the dismembered body of Eve. So earlier, once she took the face off of Eve, she got a saw and sawed her body up and put her pieces in the fridge. Now, it's interesting that she did that for Eve, because for her cousin, all she did originally was wrap her up and place her under the bed. And that's where she had stayed until Eve showed up and realized there was a smell in the house. But you would think that would have been a lot more noticeable instead of, hey, what's that smell? Like, you have a rotting corpse under your bed. I'm sure after a few days, it's not just going to be this slight smell that's, someone's just going to happen to notice and just kind of be like, no big deal. She talked that away. So she ends up killing Jasmine, but again, doesn't do anything as far as, taking her face off. Now this is where everything's really starting to fall apart. The movie is starting to wrap up, and the police now are wondering, what's going on. Once the professor shows up at the house, she says, hey, the serum is in the fridge. Go, you can go get it. Jabs the professor with something in his neck to knock him out. We don't know what it is and how she went about getting it, but she did. And this is where it turns into almost like a Dexter type moment, where she now has the professor on a table, saran wrapped his hands and legs down so he can't move, and his skin has been cut off around his neck area. This is where she uses the old serum that killed her father, and she puts it on a piece of skin, puts it on him, and it starts to take over his face, ends up killing him. She has her neighbor walk in on her and sees all this happening, so she tries now to take off running as her neighbor calls the police. Again, this is now, let's take a pause where I have a problem with the story. She's at home, and they seem to be in this neighborhood, but when she takes off running, it's like all of a sudden now she's within the city, which doesn't make much sense how she would have covered so much ground within a few seconds. So now the police are chasing her, trying to locate her. She's running through the city, and this is where John, the homeless man, comes back into play. Now remember, she still has the tiny vial of serum that does work and graft. So as she's running from the police, she comes across John and says, hide me, they're after me. And as she kneels down to get underneath this blanket to be hidden, the serum breaks on the ground. And as the police run by and ask, hey, have you seen this girl? John replies, oh, she went that way. The serum touches them both and starts to graft their entire bodies together. And that's how, and the film comes to an end where the police are looking for her. They can't find her, and you hear like a report going on that these other two girls are missing, boyfriend's in the hospital. Now we're following the aunt now. The aunt now comes back into play into this film as she's mourning the fact that she's at this table in this restaurant alone, and she doesn't know where Way is, doesn't know where her daughter is. And as she's leaving the restaurant, she's walking down the street, sees a girl that she's calling out to, thinking it's Way. Turns out it's not, and she passes this homeless person, and it's when she looks over to see them, scares her. She takes off running, and it's Way. It's Way and John who have now morphed into this one body because they've been grafted together. So you have the eyes in different places, the mouth and teeth are all in different places. Very much like what we saw in The Substance, how The Substance, was just this big morphed body that was just in all different places. And that's how it kind of ended there. And that's how this movie ended. I know, again, some areas are very confusing to keep track of what she's doing, but I would give this film overall, for body horror, I mean, it was definitely, once it got going, it was dipping into trying to be as graphic as it possibly could. I would give it 3.5, 4 out of 5, probably more than 3.5. Just because when you got to some points of the story, it just doesn't make sense how no one would notice what's going on, or no one would have noticed, certain aspects of all of a sudden this very popular girl was now all of a sudden missing. And again, just doesn't make sense, that part of the story, and that happened multiple times. The concept I like. I love the concept of taking over someone's face or their identity. But again, when everything else of you remains the same and you're portraying that person, it's just not going to make sense to me. So again, I think I would probably lean more towards the 3.5, just because from a body horror perspective, I thought it was pretty good. But outside of that, the rest of the story just doesn't flow or make sense to me. So that's going to do it for my review of Grafted. It's on Shudder, streaming on Shudder. Again, I would still recommend giving it a view for yourself. See what you think about it. If you've already seen it, drop a comment in the comment section. Let me know what you think about Grafted. And if you haven't done so already, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It helps us out a lot. And we will see you at the next one. Peace.